we started. By the time we started Eyes Wide Shut, I was already working with laboratories and telecine and actively all that kind of stuff, and a lot of other stuff too. I worked on all his films basically. From Paths of Glory, even in Killer's Kiss, because I was working with the labs on all those films. They were always being released, always being put on video, being released, and there were always subtitle translations that had to be checked and subtitle timings. So I was deep into working with Stanley, And with Eyes Wide Shut, we started with a blanket call. Well, first of all, Stanley, engaged Tom and Nicole for the lead roles, and then as soon as that was secure, I started a huge blanket casting session for every American actor we could find in the UK, and there are more of them than one would think. Really are a lot of American actors who live in London, because there's quite a big market for particularly voiceover stuff there, and but more and more Americans, as you're seeing here in America, actually more and more British being seen on your normal run of television. You're hearing more and more English accents doing voiceover for commercial advertisements. So it was a huge casting process. It really, really was. And a difficult one because none of the peripheral, when I say peripheral roles, I mean anything outside Tom, Nicole, Todd Field, basically everything else were like one shot, one scene or two scene meetings, on Tom's travels through, his mental world.
Yeah.
So there were, the casting, I can tell you, started 6 months, 7 months before we actually even got to shooting, but it didn't end until we actually finished shooting because it just became kind of unmanageable with everything else that had to be done. And the biggest challenge was actually finding, the girls to be in that masked ball scene.
Right.
And up there again, you see, we're into thousands. 4,000 sounds like a magic number, but it was well up in that area by the time we found all those girls, and once again, when I was casting, I would have to act the scene, with them. So for any role that came in, like, the hotel receptionist, I had to know the dialogue just as well as they did, so I could act it with them on the auditions, So, I was still working. Stanley used to give me notes as an actor. I was never on camera. I was always just behind it, to one side for their eye line. But he sometimes used to ring me in the morning and say, Gene, Leon, your acting was terrible last night. It was just awful. And I'd say, well, Stanley, this is like the 40th time, I've done this particular role, this particular, bit. And, inside those 40 auditions would be anything from, 5 to 10 to 15 takes until, the actor was happy with what he actually delivered, So, it went on like that. And one of the problems was also finding, because he wasn't sure about how the masked ball was going to work, originally it was going to be some kind of MC who was going to be the only person who wasn't wearing a mask to be present in that time. And that was, he was going to be the one sort of jumping around and cross-examining Tom Cruise's character, Bill. But then he realized that was a little bit sort of a la Cabaret, the kind of MC figure that he had there. So he decided he was going to do it the way he did it, which was the masked, the guy, head honcho in a red cloak and a mask. And so, I'd seen about 30 people, and I was in the middle of auditioning another person for that role, and I got a phone call inside the casting room, And I picked it up, and he said, I've decided you're going to do that. and that was the end of the discussion. That was it. That was the end of the discussion. So, I was doing that, and that's how I ended up, playing that role. But I also did, as you said, some others inside that masked ball. In fact, when he comes in, I take his coat, I usher him into the room in the next cut. I'm up in the balcony in the next cut, and I take the girl away from him in the hallway further down, and so it went on, and I was messing around with some other things there too. But so that whole process, that whole thing, it was never meant to be naturalistic, and I'm so happy to hear you say that you liked that film, because it sounds to me like you kind of understood it. It's funny how much kind of controversy, that's for one of another word, although that is the word to use really, that it raised, because it was so unexpected. It was like listening to a new Beatles recording, like listening to Sgt. Pepper after you just heard Revolver. You thought, well, what are they doing? This is not the Beatles I knew from Please Please Me. Every one of his films was like that, and I think he always caught people on the wrong foot.